This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com in review. What I'm looking at today is 1980's Fade to Black, directed by Vernon Zimmerman. And this is a very formative horror movie for me, which is to say, I watched it relatively young, and at the time it really impressed me. So having watched it later in my life, I realized that, first off, it isn't a horror movie. It's more of a thriller. And second off, it doesn't hold up particularly well, which is a pity. Fade to Black revolves around a man named Eric Benford, played by Dennis Christopher from Breaking Away. And in fact, this was his follow-up to Breaking Away, as in the next movie that he did. And that movie was very much praised in the press and gave him much attention and allocators. Fade to Black, not so much. Eric Benford works at, I believe it's a film archiving warehouse. And he is not well treated by anyone, particularly his aunt, but pretty much everyone walks over Eric. Eric is also fixated on movies. And when I say fixated, I mean beyond what most people who aren't rich are, which is to say he has suits of armor, old posters, he watches the films on an actual movie camera. He is obsessed with them, and sometimes he kills for them, to paraphrase the tagline of the movie. So as I said, there are problems with this movie, quite a few in fact. One of them is that the makeup that people are wearing, both men and women, is at times almost clown-like. It's very overdone and seems like it was put on with a trowel. It is the weirdest thing, and I don't often see that in movies. And as I said, it applies to men and women at points. Sometimes it's not the case, sometimes it is. Either way, it's confusing and inconsistent. And Fade to Black was supposedly a very troubled production. Does the look of it have anything to do with it? I don't know, but I'm willing to bet it does. Another thing is that, as I said earlier as well, Fade to Black is not a horror movie. It's more a thriller revolving around Eric Benford and his obsessions, and begins to lose touch with reality as the film progresses. And he disguises as characters such as Dracula, the Mummy, Hopalong Cassidy, and a mobster from, I believe, the movie is White Heat. The problem with this, though, is that, well, it's not a problem necessarily. It's more, there's an inconsistency to his disguises. There's no real through line for them. For instance, when he is disguised as Dracula, it's originally to attend a showing of George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. Why would you dress as a vampire to watch George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, which revolves around zombies? And let's say, for argument's sake, he actually dressed as a zombie, which would be fitting for the movie he was watching. Who does that? Dawn of the Dead is not like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, not as far as I'm aware of at any rate. And I don't know if anyone has ever done that before. So it's really odd. And even odder is that the movie could have easily explained away him having dressed as Dracula. Simply have him attend a film festival, which Dracula is on the bill, though the movie Eric would be watching at the moment would be Dawn of the Dead. It would explain why he was dressed as Dracula. So that's a little odd. And this is where he first kills a prostitute who was a person that harassed him earlier in the movie. Now, he actually didn't kill her, by the way. That's what the whole air quotes thing was for. He chased her, she fell and died. He led her to her death, but he didn't kill her directly. And this is the thing about this movie as well. Eric Binford is a very petty person in a sense that all the people that bother him, if he had a hint of a backbone, he would be able to stand up against. Because though they do harass him in various ways, they're relatively minor harassments. It's nothing that an attempt to stand up for yourself wouldn't probably halt, at least in some people. So as a result, his vengeance against them comes off as very petty, and it doesn't feel earned. And that goes to my point that Fade to Black is not a horror movie. It is a story about a guy with mental illness who loses touch with reality. Now, potentially that could be a horror movie, but the way it's executed, it is not. What sends Eric over the edge, though, is that he becomes fixated on this woman who looks vaguely like Marilyn Monroe. And she actually is interested in him and sets up a date with him. She ends up standing him up, though not deliberately. It's an accident. It just happens. She loses track of time. When she realizes it happened, she tries to go see him. But it's one more cause for Eric to lose his fucking mind. I think it would have been a much better movie if it had worked more from that mental illness angle. Just go with that and make the whole costumes thing peripheral. Though when you do involve it, make it relevant. Don't just choose characters because characters. There's no reason for him to be dressed as Dracula, for instance. So it's just distracting. Now, keep in mind, those could just be movies that the character Eric Binford happens to like. That's valid. But at the same time, it's a movie. It's not, there is no Eric Binford. It's a movie. So therefore, it has to have a certain logic to it, and it lacks that. And as Eric becomes more fixated with this woman, his schemes become really elaborate. I mean, ridiculously elaborate. For instance, in the third act of the movie, to try to see the woman who looks like Marilyn Monroe again, he sets up a photographer's studio. How did he do this? I deal with cameras quite a bit. Could I set up a photography studio? I might have a little difficulty there, especially all on my own. Yet somehow, Eric Binford not only manages to set up a photography studio, but the whole building seems, including a logo, by the way, is this made-up photography studio that he's created. Now, all the movie had to do to fix that was have him kill someone who owns a photography studio and take it over. That would have been the most logical thing to have happened. That way, it's already established and it makes sense. As the movie stands, it just kind of happens. Now, that could have happened, by the way. That is the most plausible way that I could find that he could do what he did as quickly as he did it. But once again, that's me filling in the blank. Movies are all about show, don't tell. If I am theorizing and making your movie logical, there's something wrong with your movie. And there is plenty wrong with Fade to Black. Though, the most vexing thing about it is probably, for someone that hates remakes, this is a movie that deserves a remake. It is such an interesting premise, and approached slightly differently, I think it would be a brilliant movie. As it stands, Fade to Black is certainly watchable. It's interesting. It's just not that great, though it would be best if you take a look for yourself. It's currently on iTunes. This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. Do you agree? Disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow.